So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. Particularly, as I say, welcome to some new faces. Welcome to some regulars as well. My name is Matthew Baird. I've been recruiting in the social housing space for 11 years or so. And during lockdown, I decided the best thing I could do was set up my own recruitment agency working by myself, because that was a great idea, focusing purely on social housing. But also I really kind of set up this forum because there were so many people asking me questions. Hey, Matt, what are people doing about mental health, working from home for the first time, safeguarding, etc., etc. So I said, well, look, let's get some people around the table virtually and have a chat. And it's just grown into this amazing network. We've now got over 500 subscribers, which is amazing, to the various platforms to the Social Housing Roundtable. And if you were there a couple of weeks ago at the roundtable live that we did at the end of day one at Housing 2023. There were 42 of us, including the president and vice president of the CIH, discussing culture and what's wrong in housing. So please come along, tell everybody you can about it. It is free. It will always be an open voice for all. And I had a chat with my coach this morning actually about what the purpose of this was. And I kind of described it as a way to kind of disrupt the social housing sector a bit, ask those questions that are always kind of walked around and never really asked at some of the conferences. And I don't mind whether you are a person who has loved being frontline worker for 20 years, if you're a chief exec, or if you're anywhere in between, or a consultant to the sector. If you've got a view on housing, we need to hear about it, and we need to embrace everybody's voice and not charge people hundreds of pounds to do it every single time. So that's me. It's all funded by my recruitment business. So if you are looking for staffing support, please reach out, because this is just one of the many free things I do to try and give back. Now, I was introduced to Ed via LinkedIn, and I can't remember whether I met Jubeen or Ed first. I think Jubeen came to a roundtable and then introduced me to Ed. It was like the way I think it went. And to anybody who joined our session earlier in the year with Jubeen, it was a fantastic session that really got some amazing traction. So when Ed set out and said, hey, Matt, I want to do something on net zero, on data-led decarbonisation and the work we're doing in this space, I said, well, absolutely, let's bring it to the table and let's have that chat. So will I go and do some brief admin trying to let some more people who haven't got the link in to come and join now? I'm going to pass over to Ed to A, introduce himself, and B, I guess introduce today's topic and why, especially with a lot of the conversations you're having at the housing conference a couple of weeks ago, why it's so imperative we talk about it now. So Ed, over to you.
Thanks. Thank you, Matt. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully everyone can see a beautiful corporate graphic that I've had produced by our wizards. Really lovely to be here. And yeah, thanks, Matt, for the introduction. Anyone who saw my presentation previously may remember that I didn't really know what I was talking about. And the reason for that was my esteemed colleague, Jabeen, had some terrible technical trouble. So my last presentation was a masterclass in winging it. However, today, it's not so much a masterclass. This is actually a subject that I really care about and I think has a huge opportunity to do some real good. So,
just while Ed's loading that, I will just say from a housekeeping side, if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to stick them in the chat box. After that, it is very much an open forum. Use the raise hand gesture, or if you actually are on video and want to raise your hand, I usually can pick people out and we'll bring you into the conversation.
Good stuff. I will try not to do death by PowerPoint. I've not got a load of slides. I'm just going to use these sort of an aid memoir for me, and just to kind of give a little bit of structure. So this is a brief agenda of what we plan to go through. I reckon about 15, maybe 20 minutes, depending on how much I waffle. But yeah, happy to take questions, and yeah, really looking forward to the discussion at the end. So yeah, so I'm Ed Crouch. I'm Business Development Director from Capita, a member of CIH. I'm from the sector, so my background is in local government and housing. So I've worked in housing operations, housing officer for 5 years. I've got the scars to prove it. I've served on the board of my local housing provider, and I worked for just under 8 years in social care. So this is the client group that I've always worked with has always been vulnerable people, and I was approached by Capita through LinkedIn. So keep your LinkedIn profiles open, and they asked me to join them to help bring all of the clever, wonderful stuff that Capita can do with our kind of breadth of capabilities to bring that to the housing market. So we're not necessarily known as a huge player in housing, but we do an awful lot of really incredible stuff with data, with transformation, with service improvement, and I'm really happy to be here today. I won't do too much of a sales pitch, but I'm really Okay, so this is just a recap. So context, where to start, what the quick wins, planning for the long term, a few notes of caution from old Father Time here, and 3 actions to take away. So we'll jump straight in. The context. Wow, this is kind of a depressing slide at the first sort of few points of it. So, there's a huge amount of pressure on providers. There's strict government targets, around 2030, 2050, where all different scope and out of scope carbon targets. There's also EPCC, which organisations are making significant progress on, but it is expensive, it's slow, and it's not always particularly popular with residents who are bearing the brunt of a lot of the disruption. Add into the mix an energy crisis fueled largely by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the cost of living crisis that is linked to various different factors that have been bubbling up since COVID. We've got aging stock. The UK has some really poor social housing, and I read a report recently that the energy loss from British social housing, from British housing generally, was one of the worst in Europe. But interestingly, Belgium was up there as a particularly poor provider of insulated housing, which surprised me. And I think it's fair to say that across the decades, actually, there's been a lack of investment and a lack of funding available to tackle some of these issues. And the fact that our housing stock is really old, and I think that has a significant impact on the context that we're working in. We're not dealing with properties that are brand new and all up to code and all have the ability to support a lot of the decarbonisation measures. But point 7, there's a huge opportunity. So there's a huge opportunity with all these kind of crises and difficulties going on to do the right thing and to make a real difference. So that's, I think, what we're here to talk about. And actually, what I want to talk about is how decarbonisation can do multiple things. It can reduce carbon at source. It can keep residents warmer but less. And actually, depending on what system you implement, you can actually give back, to take Matt's point. You can give back to residents, and short of rent-free weeks and reducing the rent bill, you can have the direct effect of reducing residents' bills from anywhere between 20 to 50%, depending on how you implement your decarbonisation strategy. Start. So I'm sure there'll be lots of different approaches around the table. Many organisations, of course, will have carbon reduction plans. Interestingly, I worked at a local authority and they were very proud of themselves because they introduced a carbon reduction action plan. I was sat there and my eager little brain was going, like, that's going to make a really terrible outcome. So they changed it. It's no longer the carbon reduction action plan. They just called it the carbon reduction. But there's a lot going on in the sector. I think it's worth praising. So there's a lot of the hard work. As you would expect from the title of this presentation, the starting point that I'm advocating, and it is just a point of view from myself and from Capita, is data. There's so much that organisations have. Housing providers are really great at holding data. Not so great necessarily at governing it or using all of it or deleting it, but certainly you have some of the most intimate data both about your properties, your people, your tenancy. So I think being those sort of holders of data gives you a huge opportunity to do good with it. The danger is, though, that the data has become a bit of a thing. The fact that I'm here talking about it means it is a bit of a thing. So beware shiny and new. So there is a huge danger that organisations get approached by providers like us and say, right, you need a thing, you need to do a thing, you need to get a piece of software, or you need to buy something, you need to do this, this, and this. And that's all well and good if your data is in a good state. What we find often is actually the data isn't in a good state. So what we advocate is before you start doing anything, it's good old-fashioned housekeeping. Before you cook dinner, you've got to do the washing. So to understanding the maturity of your data is absolutely vital. So if you're doing a big project on, for example, decarbonisation, do you understand the full extent of your property condition? Is your property condition data up to date? Is it in good order? Has it got gaps in it? And I think this is where we come up with drought and drowning. Depending on how your organisation is configured, you might have very little data. You might have the bare minimum to meet your regulatory requirements. Similarly, you might have more data than you can shake a stick at, and neither is good. It really interesting when I was doing some research. The Scottish government, the Scottish housing regulator, has something like 150 lines of data each provider. Whereas in Wales, I couldn't even get through to the Welsh Housing Regulation Department to see if they had a spreadsheet. So there's a real mix across the nations of the UK. But I think what's absolutely vital as a starting point is join the dots and fill gaps. If you can see, it's a bit like the periodic table. If you can see that there's gaps, even if you don't know what they are, you can start to understand where those gaps are in your data. And that could be filled by surveying residents. It could be a case of undertaking in-person surveying of properties. And I think it's really vital to have a starting point that is clear. And also to focus on what you already know, because the danger is as well, if you can start going out and collecting more data, but you might already know it, you might already have it in a different form. So it's really important when you're starting on data to understand the maturity of your organization's data. Make sure you've got everything in a logical place. And what we find as well is that if you're doing big system migration, that is an excellent time to really sort of start looking at your data. Because if you don't, the implementation cost that organizations quoted you, it's going to go up by a huge number, because the data, the work required to clean that data is really costly and expensive. So the final point is engagement. In the midst of all of this is the resident, and the danger is that if the resident is lost, then when you come fresh-faced with your funding and with your decarbonisation plan, the resident goes, well, I don't want to do that. Or, well, I've just had someone in here. Why are you coming in 6 months later to kind of, take my roof off and put something else on? So you've got to engage. And I think the resident engagement has risen up as a topic, not least because the regulator has been pretty vocal on the matter. But it's so important. We're all purpose-led organisations, and I think it's vital to put the resident at the centre of everything we do. Quick wins. We love a quick win. It's nice to be able to achieve something started in January and completed by December. There's a perversion to the energy crisis, which is the fact that it's had the effect of boosting the business case for things like solar PV. Previously, a year, 18 months ago, the payback period for an average home was sort of 8 to 11 years if you were investing in residential solar PV. Because of the increased cost of energy, those business cases are now shrinking between 3 and 5 years. And anyone who attended the CIH conference, we were there. We produced reports for a number of housing providers demonstrating what solar would look like on their roofs of their corporate buildings. And the longest payback period was 5 years. And in housing, we work on 25, 30-year business plans. So for something to be bought and paid for and have a return on the investment within 4 years, that's tomorrow. That's within the tenure of a board member. It's super, super short. So
can you outline what solar PV is, Edward?
Oh yeah, of course. Solar photovoltaic. So solar panels. Sorry, I'm breaking my own jargon rule. So thank you, Matt. I do try, but yeah, sorry. So solar panels. Broadly. So what we're advocating is assess. It's actually in terms of quick wins that are relatively light touch compared to some of the more in-depth fabric first works. It's a real great opportunity to at least assess, and there are a number of tools out there that allow you to carry out desktop assessments to get a clear idea of what the generation capacity could be, the cost, and it is something that we do. So I'll leave that. Also, piggybacking, I'm a great believer in route of least resistance. If you're doing work, if you've got fabric first works, or if you've got scheduled repairs, you've got scheduled roof repairs, you've got roof replacements even, why on earth, when you've got an option of adding in an extra work, wouldn't you do it? It comes back to the resident. Worse, the last thing the resident wants is to have a whole heap of disruption with the fabric first work, and then 6 months later, a letter comes through all bright and breezy saying we're going to do this and we're going to be bashing around your house for another 6 weeks. Last thing the resident wants. So piggyback on your schemes to make sure you're making the best use of resources. Similarly, you're paying £1,500 for a residential scaffold. Why on earth would you not use it for more than one thing if you'd assess that property as being, for example, solar viable? Similarly, understanding how your homes are used. As much as you can assess from the rooftop, there is something about how organizations need to gain a detailed understanding of how homes are lived in. And we've all had a number of conversations around the impact of condensation down from mold and the death of Ishak, and that has sent shockwaves through the industry. There are tools and there are services and systems now that can understand how property is used, and that's really vital, especially in your residents, understanding how people are using their property, Are they living in a way which is causing condensation, damp, and mold? Is there a structural issue with the property? So again, there's transaction pieces of work that can be done to understand your property to again help with a quick win. It's definitely worth considering that. There's a number of tools on the market that allowed that to be much more easy than it was 5 years ago. And finally, I'm a geek, so I look at numbers and that's one. Not everyone does that. Not everyone is that sad, frankly. But reassure yourself with the data. So I think there is something about if you've done your data maturity, you understand what data you've got. You can then reassure yourself. You can see where there are gaps. You can see where you've got property that might be underperforming in terms of its thermal efficiency. You might have indications around damp that's been identified. Similarly, if you know that you've got 5,000 properties and you surveyed them for solar panels, and you know that 60% can support it, you can start building business cases on data rather than assumptions. So we talk about the long term. So 30, do shout if I'm running over time, because I do another waffle. Housing providers work on your 25, 30-year business plan. So a lot of the investment that you're making is paid back much more quickly because of the conversion of those the energy crisis and whatnot. But certainly in terms of planning, we suggest being smart. So speak to your neighbours around procurement. This is something that I've come up a number of times around how organisations that are geographical neighbours aren't necessarily as good as they ought to be around procurement. If you're looking at a scheme, for example, solar or IoT, speak to your neighbours, even if they're much bigger than you, even if they're much smaller than you. A lot of these products and services are scalable. So if you're buying 3,000, they're buying 1,500, that's still a bigger order than doing it individually. So we really advocate in being smart with the procurement. Also, you've got to be bold. When I was on the board of my local provider, we did a really interesting exercise where we wrote a letter to ourselves from 30 years down the line. And it was a really interesting exercise to kind of go through this process of where you think get to. When you start thinking, hang on a minute, we've not made the progress, then you start thinking, well, actually, I need to start writing an apology letter. So there's definitely something about being bold. Similarly, data doesn't care about your feelings is a phrase that I've kind of merged from a few other things. There's something really important about relying on the data rather than allowing your organisation to be anecdotal. There is a caveat to that I will put in difference on the next slide. But it's really important that where you have data, use it. The biggest waste of money is collecting information and then not using it. Why would you spend all that time and effort and go for the governance, and then not lean? The big one in terms of planning for the long term is the 3Ds. I've made that up. I don't think this is necessarily the 3Ds, and I'll probably forget what they are. But it's around. I'm going to forget this one. I'll say. Hang on, bear with me. My iPad thing has decided to go slow. Yes, 3Ds. So decant, demolish, dispose. This is often a bit of a touchy area for housing providers because we don't really like knocking things down. We'd rather build things. But I think what you find is when you have a really good understanding of your data, you might recognise that actually the cost to bring a property up to code is going to be far, the value is not there. And I think when you've got decent data that shows, look, you could spend £150,000 on this property and it's still barely going to scrape an EPCC. And let's be honest, the EPC rating scheme will almost certainly change, and the requirements from government will almost certainly increase. So there's something about using data to make big strategic long-term decisions, whether you're going to demolish, whether you're going to decant to do a big refurb, or if you're going to dispose of property because it just becomes unviable. On a personal level, disposing of property that doesn't meet requirements doesn't necessarily sit completely easy with me. We've got to shift the burden. So sometimes the demolition and rebuild option is better for all sorts of reasons, especially if you've got sites that are under provisioned or under occupied. The best thing is that the data will often build the business case. So when you are looking at a scheme or you're looking at a plan, if you've got decent data and you lean heavily on that, that's much of the hard work for you because it's there, the information is there. And sometimes you will need specialist support around interpreting the data. A lot of organizations have invested in their own data and insights team, but if not, there are providers out there that can do a really great job of helping build business cases. And the last one on here that I just want to talk about is energy equity. This is a topic that came up at the housing conference, and it's a really interesting one. And in the roundtable. I'd be interested to see what other people are doing. Housing providers over the last 10 years have installed measures to reduce carbon and reduce energy. But generally speaking, they've been individual properties. So if I live in my nice south-facing house, and I've got some solar panels, I am living the dream. I've got virtually free energy in the summer, and I'm having a great day. My neighbour, who has a north-facing roof, doesn't like me very much because they don't get any energy, because they've got a north-facing roof, they don't support solar PV, and they live in the same property, they pay the same rent, etc. So what we're advocating is a concept called energy equity, and this comes from expanding solar panel systems to make it fairer. So, for example, if you have 5,000 homes and 3,000 can support solar, the worst thing you could do as a purpose-led organisation is give 3,000 people virtually free energy and tell the other 2,000 that they're going to get something else later, probably maybe. So what we're saying is, with the smart grid system that we have in the UK, you can pool that energy. So you can take all of that energy that you generate, you can pool it, and you can share the generation revenue equally across your resident in a virtual heat network, a virtual energy network. And this is something that some organizations are considering, but not enough, frankly. And it's the more solar that is installed on individual properties with the energy going directly to the resident, the bigger the problem will be further down the line. So planning for the long term, just be careful around those individual solar arrays, because once you've given free energy to a resident, you can't take it away. You'll have to wait for a change of tenant or prepare for a big old bonfire.
A question on the chat there, Ed. What about the increased embodied carbon in demolishing and rebuilding? Is this being accounted for?
It would need to be accounted for sure, and that is a data-led question that you would put into the mix. So certainly, there's always that consideration. It's the same with buying an electric car. Buying a big heavy electric car could take 20 years to reduce that embedded carbon. And yeah, and I suppose the question will be, is measuring up the social value. So, and also the carbon cost. So I think it's something that you would need to put into the mix. But again, you would understand embedded carbon because of data, and you would build that into your business case, because yeah, you're right. It could be that the carbon impact of a demolition is unpalatable in the short term, but it could be that actually if you stretch the carbon usage of that building or demolishing over that 30-year period, it could be that there's a 15-year advantage of demolishing. So yeah, it's a really, really good point, and it's one that relies heavily on data. So yeah, good question. Nearly there, folks. Just some notes and caution, really, like I said, from me. So actually, it's very interesting because it relates back to the last question. Do not forsake all others when it comes to data. There will always be other points of view. I think being data-led doesn't mean you have to be data blind. So definitely take account of lived experience, take account of expertise from parts of your business. So you will have people with far more letters after their name than I've got. And certainly, take account of that when you're making your plans. Engage early. I think, again, you've got to engage with residents, with stakeholders, with elected members, with your board, with your funders, with your strategic partners, because they will either have a view on what you want to do, and also they might want to share some of the burden. And certainly with corporate building, we're seeing a huge amount of partnerships jumping up with organisations, even sharing heat. So for example, where I am in the South Coast, the local council is building a sewer source heat network, which is literally energy from waste, and it's going to be heating the port, the town hall, the library, the children's centre, and it's heat from waste. There's something about hot air and local government I won't go into, but there's something interesting about how that heat will be generated from the sewer. Incredible. Seek out champions. A bit of a cliche, a little bit retro, but there's something about if you've got a board, if you've got a residents group, you've got a staff group. Seek out people who have an interest, because they will be your advocates. And it's, if you've got residence groups, and I know the power of well-convened residence groups. If you've got a residence group on your side, then your job is a lot easier. If not, then it won't be. So seek out champions. I met a really interesting guy actually at CIH, and he knew his stuff, and he was an advocate, and he was probably going to have a bigger effect on his organisation than he realised, just by knowing his stuff, being interested. The other one is about dissent being good. there's a danger that we kind of get into a little eco bubble on this and get all righteous and whatnot. Actually, you can't change the world unless you take people with you. So embrace dissent, allow people to say that it's rubbish, even if they want to say the earth's flat and they want to wear a tinfoil hat, that's fine. You've got to embrace it, because if you don't, you then start othering people. And once you start doing that, you end up creating little pockets of angst. And then ultimately that little pocket can grow and be very, very loud when you have a residents meeting. So embrace dissent. And oftentimes, you know, certainly in public meetings or in larger sessions, people tend to sort of talk themselves out of their own argument, especially if the room is you know, clearly sat in a direction. But embrace dissent. Anchor yourselves in the facts, deliverables, data, and do what I didn't do and avoid jargon. Because again, certainly residents don't always appreciate a lot of the jargon and SAP 10.2 and PV, IoT, all of that marketing logic. And keep yourselves honest and on track. It's really important that you hold yourselves to account, look at what you're trying to achieve, be purpose-led, set a plan, stick to it. But if the evidence changes, change it. So I think there's definitely something about keeping yourself honest, keeping them on with you, and staying on track. And finally, just my 3 takeaways. So number 1, get a deep understanding of your data. Roots up, understand what you've got, where the gaps are, where the data governance is missing. But get a really deep understanding, because it will be a solid foundation for everything you want to achieve. We're advocating and setting your stock for solar PV, photovoltaic solar panels, and IoT, Internet of Things, for things like monitoring condensation damping. And like I said, there's a number of ways to skin account both of those, but certainly it's an area where Capita has expertise. And finally, and this is actually the most important one, we talk about embedded carbon. This is the need to embed decarbonisation into the organisation culture. It can't be a thing. The worst thing you could do is have a decarbonisation office. You know, not that it has offices today, but you know what I mean? It's got to be that golden thread that runs through, because ultimately it is. It's not going away. It's going to be with us. The concept is going to be with us through all of our careers, to the end of our careers, perspective. And it's got to be considered at the front and centre of the decisions that you're making. It can't be seen as an adjunct. So those are my 3 takeaways. They're not the only 3; they're the top 3 from my perspective, but certainly it's a really great starting point with data, understanding the stock, and looking at that cultural piece, because what's the expression? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. On that note, I'll end. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ed, and very much. I think a really interesting kind of overview of I guess the main issues in the in the sector at the moment. If anybody has got questions, queries, feel free to put them in the chat or use the raise hand function, which is done on the reactions tab, I believe. I didn't realize I had the recognize hand gestures, which is why I don't know if you saw Ed do a thing at one point and his little fist came up. So that's what that was all about. Just while I'm waiting for others to dive in, Ed, and a question for me, I guess almost on your very last point there, because a lot of what you're talking about isn't necessarily new. I think there's an issue maybe with accountability, and you said there that it kind of needs to run through the culture. We need to embed it, and I think this is one of maybe the key issues in housing in general at the moment is accountability and culture. Where do you think the onus for this needs to be? You know, when we're talking about embedding it into the culture, it still needs to be able to be led on by someone in the business. Is it a chief exec? Is it your executive director of assets or development or whatever it might be? Or is it, I guess, more on your housing? Where do you feel like, when you've seen it be successful, I guess, who has been leading on it and why has that worked?
I think what comes to mind is a poster in the staff area of my first job, which was a health and safety poster. And the bit that was in bold was health and safety is everyone's business. And I think, if I'm honest, I think to take back a couple of slides around my comments around you can't change the world without taking people with you. I don't believe that even the most powerful chief executive or the most dynamic board can affect change required on their own. I think you've got to have that golden thread that goes through the organization. You need to have people that are bought in. And actually, if you don't have those people, there is a really, there's a tough decision, which is your organization, does it need a reset? And I think, we've all worked in organizations where there's been people there you thought, oh my God, how have you managed to kind of get away with being like that for so long and not get fired, frankly. But I think organisations need to look at their entire structure from top to bottom, because ultimately the people that are having the most contact with the residents are probably those that have the least power. And so there's something there about leveling, rebalancing the power between the front line and the boardroom, because those who are having, like I said, the most interactions, the most regular conversations are those with the least power on paper. So I think connecting executives with residents, the board, with residents groups, etc., is a really great place to start, because you can get a broader, wider insight, which I think is always good.
Completely agree. I'm going to bring in Claire in just a second, but just on that, why do you think there isn't a culture of something that's so imperative already running? Is it a cost thing, or is it blissful ignorance thing? Why do you think there isn't more kind of focus on something that's, we're being told as a sector to sort this out now, and yet still people are kind of going, yeah, well, at some point?
I think it's hard to eat an elephant, and I haven't tried recently, but certainly, you need to start small. Nibble the elephant. I think this is the issue: is you can get overfaced by things. So I think that's why it's really important to just, what do we say, Capita? Start small, think big, scale fast. Not necessarily in that order, but there's something about take the bit you can deal with, and deal with that. Don't try and do the whole thing, but identify an important part and then work through that and then move on. And what you'll find is the plan tends to build itself. It's a fair challenge, and it's a challenge. I don't think it's just housing that's struggling with the concept at all.
Oh, it absolutely isn't. There's some questions in the chat I'll dive to in a minute, but Claire, nice to see you, and do please come in.
Oh yeah, thanks, Matt. Yes, I completely see why it's a challenge, and like you've just said, we need this to be going through the culture. Health and safety needs to go through the culture. Data needs to go through the culture. Matt's speaking at an event for me soon about robust data and privacy culture, as part of a panel where we'll have a whole day about data. Is there a way, I don't expect you to have this answer off the top of your head, but is there a way that we can bring this all together so that people aren't kind of faced with so many things that we're trying to embed? I'm just raising that as a general question for everyone, really, because it feels overwhelming, doesn't it? We've got to provide housing, as part of all this. It's huge, isn't it?
It is.
I don't expect anyone to have an easy answer.
No, I'm going to bring Jabin in on this, but when you've got TSMs and so much pressure elsewhere, you're right. It is another huge thing to focus on, but it's the nature of the sector, isn't it? It's always changing, it's always evolving, there's always a million and one things, and yet we usually find a way. But this just seems to be lagging behind a little bit, and I wouldn't be surprised to see more focus on something like the TSMs than this over the next year, because it's going to be reported on first, and it's almost that instant firefighting. But Jabin, over to you.
Yeah, I think that's what I think you're saying, Claire, what everybody feels in the sector. I think it feels like just one, emergency after the next. Pandemic was insane and really, really quite intense. I think for the housing sector, to me, I feel like the sector were very much key workers, certainly those. So it's just feels relentless. But I think what we have to approach housing in a different way. So I think if we try to keep running our organizations as we have done, we won't be able to, because we're not able to kind of manage all the different things. So we have to look at different tools and different approaches that expand our capacity. So it's not about then, so this is where we have to start meaningfully looking at data so we can plan. Ed made a really phenomenal point about a 30-year perspective, because if we're trying to do we've got like a major works plan that's normally like maybe 5 years if you're lucky, then you've got, damp and mold becomes a thing. So then you're not getting extra money. So then that knocks out this program, which then has a knock-on impact for that. But if we first of all got a baseline of what properties we've got and the components they're in. We've been saying this for years, but let's do that. Let's sort that. Let's get the plan. Then we can start to think, okay, within the next 30 years, we've got 2050, we've got net zero. We're going to have more aging population, so we're going to need to think about those sorts of things. There's increased requirements from our residents for safety, so things like video stuff. So if we look at it from a 30-year perspective, then we can start to plan our investments accordingly. Ed brought up another great point, piggybacking. So we know, for example, we've got this estate, we've got this roofs. When we're doing that, we bung on some panels. We make sure, because we say this all the time, oh, we've got to, let's start doing that. So I think for us in the sector, it's really taking stock and saying the nature of the context in which we're working is different. So we need different tools. We need to embrace digital technology. We need to embrace some of the tools that expand our capacity. So yeah, that's what I think. I think it's, if we try to keep operating in the same way, we will get overwhelmed, just burn ourselves out.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. We do need different ways of working, but I think there is a risk of just going after the new shiny
new thing. That's
and
it.
Not coming back to basics. I think I completely agree with what you're saying. We need to take stock, literally. We need to know what our stock is, and we don't always, do we? We've got huge gaps, like Ed was saying as well. But if we use the shiny things to do the basics better, that's it, isn't it, really?
Absolutely.
There you go. Me.
There you go.
We've sorted it out. We've sorted it all.
There you go. One round table. Sorted out the whole section in 10 minutes. There have been a couple of questions that have come through the chat, and if anybody wants to dive back in on obviously those points made, please do. But Ed, I guess these are directed towards you. That if anybody has answers, please feel free to dive in. What kind of roof maintenance can be done on roofs where solar panel or solar PV is mounted, e.g. moss removal? Is it more difficult, or are most PV panels easily tiltable?
The technical question, I don't have a detailed answer. What I do know though is that with Capita, we don't do panels. We sort of do the advisory, but certainly from what I understand, the first question is, how often do people get their roofs cleaned anyway? And this is often a multi-double digit number. Maintenance is a vital part of maintaining a solar panel system. So most providers, when they install them, will have some kind of maintenance contract, whether that's cleaning, an annual clean, and then a sort of a 5-yearly cyclical, deeper look. But most of them they're designed to be serviceable. But the way that they're installed actually often has the effect, as I understand it, of reducing things like this, because effectively the area is covered. So you don't get that kind of, it tends to not suffer with the same issue. But yeah, we always advocate, if you're looking at a system, do make sure that you're factoring in the maintenance and repair costs and the pigeon removal. And that's certainly something, pigeons, because solar panels get nice and toasty. So they're an ideal place for young pigeon families doing this. But it is a consideration. We do advocate making sure that you have a decent contractor lined up to maintain it. Because if you don't, then there's a predicted 0.5% reduction in generation per year, just based on degradation. But if you keep them grubby, then they will not generate as much. So there's a real vested interest in keeping them clean.
Brilliant. There's been a point made in the chat from Gemma Smith. My internal audit team have been testing awareness and commitment of our EMV strategy across all teams as part of individual internal audit reviews. And it's working really well. Some positive findings as well as areas for improvement that can help the relevant team to focus their resources. We are also testing the data as part of this year's plan. And that's excellent because obviously it's showing a cultural insight, but also it's a team actually using the data they're getting. And I think, Ed, this goes back to one of the core themes of your presentation today is housing is a data-rich sector. We have lots of it, but often the data we just get it because we feel we need it, and it gets stuck somewhere on a system that probably doesn't talk to another system, and that's one of the big areas and the big issues. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I mean, it is fair to say. I think Claire's put it there, data rich, insight poor. There is something about. There's also a GDPR issue, isn't there, about massive collecting of all this data, but there's something about really understanding how you're going to use it. And I think what organisations find when they do things, when they do a data audit or a data maturity assessment, what they find is actually most of the data that might be squirreled under the wrong heading, or it might be linked to a person and it's actually property data or tenancy data. And yeah, I mean, I think any organization that can put its hand up and say, our data is in 100% tip-top condition, and I'll take them for a client, because it's quite a feat, especially in 2023. There's so much data available.
Completely agree. I will jump back to Claire on that in a moment, because I know that's 100% your wheelhouse. But there was a question from Tony in the chat. Are there any cooperative schemes that you know of, or are there any planned? Because he's asking, why can't solar panels be included in new builds as a matter of course?
So there's two things there. So yes, there are some cooperative energy schemes. There's one along the coast for me in Brighton. They tend to suffer a bit because you need to have the critical mass and or the right funding. So sometimes they're initiated by community groups or by local authorities. They've generally been quite small scale, and I think that there are various reasons for that. But what we're advocating is actually housing providers are in a really advantageous position. You've got the units, you've got the stock, you can get access to the funding. You're generating, depending on how you configure your scheme. For example, if you have 10,000 units and 6,000 can generate energy, you could be generating hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of energy per year. You can then divide that equally amongst your residents. Additionally, you can, depending on how you configure the scheme, you could choose to retain an element of that generation capacity to help fund the scheme, or to help fund other methods of decarbonisation. So we're at, yes, there are cooperatives, but they're relatively small scale. In terms of the other bit, in terms of panels on new builds, yes, I mean, that is happening. Problem is, so it depends on the local plan of the area that's being built in, and often they'll be negotiated in or out by the planning office. The problem is, though, to take my energy equity point, the panels almost certainly will be going to the resident. That is creating the sting in the tail that I'm genuinely concerned about, that in 20 years' time, if that continues, you will end up with a first and a second class citizen approach, whereby those who have a sunny roof have panels and those who don't, which is why energy networks and cooperatives are vital to have that energy equity. Otherwise, housing providers will be complicit in enabling a unfair distribution of solar generation, which is not what you want to be doing. So yeah, so it's an interesting area, and one that action needs to be taken now. Otherwise, every panel that goes up is another panel that is contributing to that unfairness with the best of intention.
And actually, what's interesting is that Olga's just shared something there from the State of Housing in the EU 2023 report. And on page 10 of theirs is public, cooperative and social housing and the fair energy transition. Where are we and where are we heading? So thank you, Olga, for sharing that, because I hadn't seen that before, and that looks really, really interesting. Claire, I'm going to bring you in.
Thanks, Matt. I just wanted to pick up on Ed has very kindly opened the door to GDPR, and those of you who know me will know that's my specialist subject. But it's nicer when somebody else introduces it, so I'm not always jumping in. Well, what I want to say is that a lot of people misunderstand GDPR and data protection in general and think that it's just about keeping the data secure. And so they kind of will come up with some amazing projects, especially Internet of Things. That's really jumped out to me. Oh, made me a little bit nervous. But Internet of Things, anything that we're doing with housing is about people. So it does come under data protection. And we quite often will have these massive projects and it'll all be worked out. And then somebody will go, oh, and we'll just stick some security on it. And then it will be GDPR compliant. And actually, they then go and speak to somebody like me. And I go, no, we have to unpick everything and start from the beginning. Because compliance with data protection is actually about what is the purpose of the data and how are we collecting it, and are we being transparent, and do people know what we're doing with their data and why. So you have to kind of unpick if you've not worked all that in to the project to begin with. The image that I use, and some of you will have seen, I've started using, is an egg being cracked over a cake, a raw egg being cracked over a baked cake, because that's what we're trying to do by doing data protection at the end. We need to bake it in from the start and have it in the ingredients of the projects. And it will not stop you doing what you want to do, but if you come to a data protection advisor at the end and ask them to, make it compliant or sign it off, we will make a mess and we will have to tear apart your cake. So, bring us in as early as possible is my message that I'm always banging on about. So thanks for the opportunity for that again.
That's all right. It's no problem at all. A couple of things from a point there from Amy Somerville. It's all very well speaking about PV. However, many of our homes are listed and conservation areas, and local planners are not open to approving PV. How do we get planners on board?
There's two things there, isn't there? There's the horses for courses point, one of my favorite cliches. I'm certainly not going to advocate necessarily the delisting or even installing solar where it's not appropriate. I think it does come down to what's appropriate, what is the appropriate decarbonisation tool for that area. There are some really innovative alternatives. Solar slate is something that is still it's taking its time to come through. It does exist, but again, if you've got 500-year-old property that's listed up to the eyeball, then yeah, you're not going to get the local planning office to agree to have Toshiba panels locked on the roof. I think there's a wider conversation around sites of special scientific interest and listed buildings and what other methods are appropriate, but certainly horses for courses. And I think when you've got an area that's protected based on its visual appeal, then I think you would always struggle with something that is a highly visual installation such as solar panels. So I'm not necessarily sure I would advocate getting planners on board with that, but I think getting a more of a open conversation on other things, because depending on the type of listing, I know it can affect internals as well. And that's where I think there needs to maybe be a little bit of a conversation, because if it's got a boiler from the 1900s, then it's probably worthy of replacement with something, even if it's not of an ancient character. But yeah, it's a challenging one. I think where you've got listed buildings, solid walls, all of these things make it harder. But I think it's got to be horses for courses, and ultimately it's down to the individual community. Because that's the other thing, is to take my point about taking people with you. You've got a listed building with a special interest. The last thing you want to do is enrage the local residents around it, because again, it does damage to the wider cause of decarbonisation and clean energy and energy reduction. So yeah, tread with an abundance of caution.
Completely fair, and yeah, I think that's a very, very interesting point. And so much that there comes to that relationship building and everything that goes on around it, because if that is your answer, then there's going to be something, because they have their own targets and things like that as well to obviously get signed off on. Tony's asked, what is the efficiency of solar panels versus a wind turbine or two, for example?
Don't know. Completely honest, I mean, there's a practical point. What I would say is that regardless of the efficiency, I would say that generally speaking, the practicality of panels is overwhelmingly easier than turbines. Turbines, I think, are good for certain areas, not necessarily all areas, whereas panels, generally speaking, if you've got a roof that's between 30 and 40 degrees, then panels work. There are lots of different, like I said, horses for course, there are many different types of clean energy generation tools, including, tidal, including, you put water, you stick an old-fashioned water wheel. There's all sorts of things you can do. But I think in terms of, that's why I put it in the quick win pile, in terms of wide appeal, 5, 6, 7 million social homes across the UK, overwhelming number with roofs that are capable, etc. I think in terms of a quick win, that we certainly see solar as what in that pile, but it's not the only solution. There are lots of things, and to be honest, by the time we're all retiring, there'll be solutions that have been invented that we haven't even thought about. So there's definitely something about looking at the short term, but having an eye on the long term as well.
Fantastic. Olga's put in the chat that this isn't necessarily about efficiency, but with solar PV, there is a community energy sharing of solar as well. And I think we're still struggling, I think, from a housing community perspective, maybe, to look at that kind of collective works on this, because, you know, as always put there, it can be concentrated in dense neighborhoods. We have streets in, you know, many major cities in the UK which have got 4 housing providers, someone else owns the lease, someone else is running the support, and that partnership working is incredibly difficult. And I know obviously this is something that Capita, amongst others, are trying to navigate and trying to work their way through in terms of this sector. But when, you know, just from your perspective, Ed, and obviously from being at the conference last week, what is that mindset? What are you finding from mindset? Because I'll be very aware not to put too many of my own opinions on, of collaborative, I guess, and shared working in the housing space at the moment. And we're moving into the last few minutes with slightly diversifying the conversation, but is there an openness of people going, right, well, you cover part of that, you cover part of that, we'll look at this kind of thing? Or was it still very kind of, well, it's not my responsibility, it's yours?
There's lots of warm words, there's lots of enthusiasm in theory, but I think oftentimes the devil is in the detail. And I think there's a methodology, we invented it, but something along the lines of design your utopia. So ignore for a minute the law, ignore what's practical, ignore what's achievable, ignore what you can afford. Design your utopia first. Once you've agreed on what you want to achieve, then you can start layering in all of the boring bits that make it less fun. I'm not going to pick on GDPR, but you know, looking at how you can then constrain. Because the danger is, if you say to organizations, right, you're going to do a partnership, before we start, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't speak to this person, you can't. What you end up with is you reduce the discussion to the point where people go, I don't think it's worth it, too complicated, not worth the hassle, not worth the paperwork. But actually, if you start with a blanker page with fewer constraints, you will get better creativity. And I think what was really striking from the CIH conference week before last was when we were talking to providers, they were really seeing like little light bulbs around this concept of energy equity and, you know, creating a shared energy network. And it ticks so many of the boxes that organizations are really looking to tick around sustainability, putting money back into the pockets of residents, investing in your stock, and taking decisions for the long term. I think the issue is it is a case of opening the door, having the conversations, because there are solutions out there. It's just a case of, you know, taking advantage of them and getting going. And that's why, to bring it back to my point around data, if you don't understand how many of your properties are solar feasible, how can you go into a conversation with your sustainability lead in the next organization and go, right, we're a 10,000 unit provider, we've got 3,000 we can bring to the table. So that's why we're saying this absolute starting point for things like mass solar is a desktop understanding solar feasibility, because then you can at least say, what's the quantum? What are we working with? It might be in, let's pick a county, Yorkshire, depending on where Yorkshire actually is. It might be that you've got, you know, 150,000 homes that are solar feasible, that are spread around X different providers. Join them all up, create a pot, create a virtual energy provider, and all of a sudden you'd have the effect of reducing, you know, 300,000 people's energy bills, because that's the total number of social homes in that combined area. It's a huge area. I mean, I'm happy to have, you know, conversations offline with people who want to talk about it, because it is a fascinating area where housing providers are in a great position to make a significant impact.
Really appreciate it. And I think this is one of my, you know, people say, why do we do the roundtables and what's the purpose of them? And so much of it is to get people around the table, to have, you know, shared thoughts like you've just shared there, but also to kind of go, well, actually, look, you know, we've got this person here from this housing provider, this person here from this housing provider, they can connect with each other and we can get more partnership working because we've got the people. And you can, you know, everyone's got a very different outlook and view on the future of housing and what it looks like. I think accountability is a massive piece at the moment. I think people putting their head above the parapet and people asking those difficult conversations, and it takes someone, you know, obviously your example there was Yorkshire. It would take 2 or 3 of the chief execs going, right, well, we're going to collaborate, we're going to meet and let's discuss, let's have a chat, and then we'll feed it out and see who else, because you have to have people leading it. And sometimes when you've got a business, you know, like my company, like yours, whoever else who are affiliated with but don't necessarily work, you know, as a provider in the sector, there's often a question around profits and how the money is spent. And I'd love to see more collaboration and more people kind of coming forward and going, well, actually, can you help? Matt, loads of people, can you put 5 people in a room and have a chat about it? And by the sounds of it, Ed, that's what you're advocating for too. And we can have as many discussions as you like. I'm trying to do a weekly poll each week that's a bit confrontational on the housing side, because I think too often we, as I said at the beginning, walk around the easy conversations and don't go, right, well, we know what we need to do. How do we do it? Who's going to step forward and actually start this? And if anyone's listening back to this and wants to get involved with that, then please do, because there's enough people in this room and in this wider audience that want to see change happen. And you can see that from last week's poll on CEOs that I put up, which was intentionally controversial, which was, should there be a tenure on CEOs? And we've had nearly 300 votes, and everyone's got a very different thought on it, and no one is really in one camp or another. And I think that's where we are with this, which is lots of people have an idea on what to do about net zero and decarbonisation, and maybe working together and maybe not, and who we can work with. But there isn't someone coming forward going, right, I'm taking charge of this. I'll do this if you come and partner with me, but then we also need a third. And that would be amazing to see. And if anybody is listening to this and wants to reach out to Ed or Jubeel or anyone else at Capital, or indeed myself, then please do, because it'd be incredible to see something like that really taking hold. Ed, we've got about 90 seconds left. Are there any last minute thoughts from yourself just to wrap up today?
No, just to say thank you very much for everyone's time. We are always looking for willing victims or volunteers of a crazy scheme. So there's certainly around energy equity. That is something that I'm personally really interested in, and how we can partner up. And there's all sorts of clever funding mechanisms out there. And like I said, with the right people, with the right data, and with the right attitude, there's not much that can't be achieved with a sector that's got so much goodwill in it. So yeah, happy to chat. Add me on LinkedIn. I'm a relatively normal person. It's my working for a large blue chip. But yeah, happy to chat, and it's been great to spend time with you today.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And like I say, thank you for joining today. We've got a very different topic on next week's roundtable, which is about the impact of trauma. So it's going to be a very kind of different move from this. But if anybody ever wants to get involved in a future roundtable, please let me know. I'm just about booked up until the end of September, but we are looking for Q4. I've got Claire's Hive Live, which I think is the 25th of September. Fantastic. So you can see me there if you want to talk more on the data side. But like I say, anybody wants to reach out, please do. For now, just thank you to Ed, Capita, and everyone who's got involved today. And I'll no doubt see you at a future event. Cheers.
See you all soon.